Several federal public service unions are putting together formal complaints over the federal government's new return to the office mandate. Beginning in September, public servants will be required to return to offices at least 3 days a week. Right now, the requirement is 2 days a week. Ottawa Mayor Mark Sutcliffe said this move could help a struggling downtown core.
Clearly, it's better for businesses downtown and restaurants if there are more people downtown more often, whatever the reason that is. We don't want to have downtown Ottawa hollowed out with empty stores and restaurants and empty buildings and boarded up windows like we've seen in other North American cities when there's been big changes to the downtown core because the major employer has left town or cut jobs dramatically.
The unions say this decision came without consultation and that it undermines their collective agreements, a claim the Liberal government and the NDP don't agree on.
This was a negotiated part of the agreement, and that's what should happen. These matters should be negotiated, and then the agreement should be respected. And what the Liberals are doing are disrespecting that agreement, are breaking an element of it, and of course the workers should be able to count on our support to stand with them, to apply pressure on the government to make sure they follow up and follow through with their word.
The hybrid model continues to exist. A hybrid work environment continues to exist. There is, for many people, a 4-month transition period. All of that is within the jurisdiction of the Government of Canada.
Chris Aylward is the National President of the Public Service Alliance of Canada. Chris Aylward, it's good to see you again. Thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
You come out very strong, united front with other public sector unions, saying you're going to you've collectively filed unfair labor practices, and you want your members to do thousands of grievances. What's the basis, like the actual legal collective bargaining basis for these complaints?
David, what the issue really is here is the way that this government made this decision. That's our problem. Last year, during our strike, as you know, 155,000, one of the largest national strikes in the country, we came out of that strike with a letter of agreement with this government that they would set up panels to review remote work situations, depending on the work category and, of course, depending on personal circumstances. They failed to do that. All they've done for the past year is put up roadblocks and basically stonewalled us on the creation of these panels. So we have an agreement. This government hasn't honored that agreement. And now they make this unilateral, arbitrary decision based on what?
But how does this violate the agreement? If the language they have issued says, we want you in the office 3 days a week, and then you can apply to work remotely and have extra time working out of the office. Isn't that where the panel process kicks in, not on the baseline expectation to be at work?
No, not once they made the announcement last week when they said, here's our new policy now, everybody back in the office 3 days a week. As I said, that was the problem that we had with this. First of all, no consultation on this, a total disregard for our agreement, our letter of agreement that we negotiated last year with them. So Minister Anand can say, but this doesn't form part of the collective agreement. Minister Anand, we have an agreement with your government that you failed to honor. And now you're just doing like total disrespect towards your employees, our members, in not respecting that agreement and making this unilateral, as I said, decision without even coming to us and consulting with us. That's the issue here. And we're not asking for 5 days in the office. We're saying sit down with us so that we can figure out the best way forward for workers, not in the best interest of right-wing premiers or anybody else, is sit down and what's the best way forward to provide the services to Canadians and for workers.
Okay, Anita Anand was asked about this today. She, of course, is the Treasury Board, President of Treasury Board and responsible for this. And here's what she had to say to reporters today.
A hybrid work environment is not within the collective agreements. It is something that at the time of the negotiations, the Government of Canada retained prerogative over to determine the scope of the hybrid environment.
So, Chris Aylward, you heard her there essentially saying this is still a management right, and that's the way the collective bargaining ended a year ago. Is she wrong when she says that?
Basically what Minister Anand has just admitted to, that we are not going to follow our agreement that we have with the Public Service Alliance of Canada for the past 12 months. Basically, that's what she's saying, and that is very unfortunate, and we're sick and tired of this Trudeau Liberal government making promises to workers and not following through on them.
Okay, but I just want to be clear on this. The agreement you have, there's the collective agreement, but then there's the agreement you have on remote remote work, and that's like a side letter to the, it's not in the collective agreement itself, it's a side parallel process that you've agreed to.
That is correct. You're absolutely right, David. It is not enshrined in our collective agreement, but we have a letter of agreement that this government signed with us. And basically, Minister Anand today is now saying, we're not going to honor that agreement. As a matter of fact, we haven't done anything with that agreement for the past 12 months since they signed it off with the Public Service Alliance of Canada, and that is very frustrating for our members.
So is it the process you're upset about here, Mr. Aylward, or is it the 3 days a week? Because, you know, I come in 5 days a week. I'm public sector as well. A lot of people go into the office 5 days a week. Some have never worked remotely, even going back to 2020 when the world went sideways. Why is 3 days a week such a problem, just operationally and for your individual members?
We have many members, David. We have a very diverse union. And even during the 2 years of the pandemic, our trades members could not work from home. Our firefighters couldn't work from home. Our Coast Guard members couldn't work from home. Our frontline CBSA members couldn't work from home. But we have a good chunk of workers, members, who have demonstrated during the 2 years of the pandemic that working remotely is effective. We put out millions of Canada Emergency Relief Benefit checks, tens of thousands of Canada emergency wage subsidies during the pandemic, all done remotely. And what we're saying to this government is that, number one, we have a letter of agreement with you since last year that you have not honored. You promised consultation on this issue. You haven't consulted with us. As a matter of fact, you went the opposite way and you misled us for the past number of months, saying you're not changing your telework policy. And if you were to change it, you would consult with the unions. No consultation whatsoever.
But 3 days a week, you know, it is still 2 days by default that lifestyle and work flexibility that you want for your members is baked in to their work week. I mean, that's 100 days at home over a 52-week year. I mean, why is that not an acceptable compromise here? Because you've got business people who say we need civil service back in the core because, you know, the debt was carried, nobody lost a job in the public sector. Why is this not an acceptable compromise for hybrid work?
The government needs to sit down and talk to us about this. Rather than making these unilateral, one size fits all, that's their approach to it, is really one size fits no one in this particular case. Sit down and talk to us so we can move forward on this issue. Stop making the arbitrary decisions. Stop making promises to federal workers that you continue to go back on, and you continue to renege on and backtrack on. That's what our members are so frustrated about. They come out and they say, okay, 2 to 3 days in the workplace, that's acceptable, no problem. Now we have an agreement in place that they have yet to honor, that if someone comes in to say, hey, I have a 3-day arrangement, or I need a 4-day remote arrangement, okay, what's the reason?
But don't you need to baseline it before you start deciding who can have extra time out of the office? We've gone through this at the CBC. We've been trying to get people back to work and other people wanting the flexibility other people had. And it's like there's no baseline consistency to start from before you start deciding who can work from home.
But what's the basis of the decision for 3 days? Where are they coming up with 3 days? Is that what Amazon has decided to do? Is that what Nike in the United States has decided to do? Because they have yet to say what's the true basis of their decision other than say it's a managerial right. Well, guess what? Our collective agreements are full of managerial rights throughout our collective agreements. So to say it's a managerial right, just like the argument that was trying to be made during the strike, it is completely baseless. Sit down with us, honor the agreement, and honor the promises that you've made to federal workers.
But if there's a management right in your collective agreement, it's because you've collectively bargained limits on the management right. That did not happen in this particular case. So you may have the side letter, so I just wonder, how do you grieve this if it's not in the collective agreement and it's only in the side letter? I mean, does that not undermine the weight of the argument if it goes to an arbitrator or gets to that sort of grievance process?
No, because the agreement that we signed last year with this government is basically the alternative to the official and the formal grievance process. So we said, we need a process. Here's what it should look like. They agreed with it. They signed it off. But they have yet to honor it, and now they're going back on their word.
There's another agreement that has been signed that you're trying to have one of the parties use to get leverage on this. You want the New Democrats to use their power in the supply and confidence agreement to help the public sector unions in this particular fight. How does this supply and confidence agreement apply to this particular situation? And what would you actually expect Jagmeet Singh and his caucus to do here?
Look, the NDP has proven now for sure that they are the only party in this country that cares about Canadians and cares about working people in this country. The only party that to bring out the pharmacare, national pharmacare campaign, a national dental campaign. They expanded and improved the Canada Pension Plan, and they're the only party that's going to help us, and they've committed to help us and help workers in this situation. And they'll use the levers, they'll use the mechanisms, whatever that may look like, contained within the supply and confidence agreement.
Right,
and that's what we're asking for.
The issues you mentioned, dental and pharmacare, these were in the supply and confidence agreement. 3-day work week, 2-day work week, the work conditions of the public service is not. So like, how do you expect them to inject this into this when they have to live up to their letter of that agreement as well?
Because as I said, they're the only federal party that truly supports working people in this country, David. And that's why we've turned to the NDP to say, we need your help, and they've agreed. We will help you, and we will help your members through this situation.
Right. So you want them to apply pressure, but not necessarily pull the plug on the supply and confidence agreement and strip the government of its...
Whatever it's going to take to get this government to realize they broke promises, and now they're going back on their word. We need to fix that.
Okay, so the last time we spoke was after you settled your strike and got your collective agreement. You're now in another conflict with the government. You don't have a strike mandate. You don't have that kind of leverage to go out on the picket line. I know you're going to do the grievances and the unfair labor practices, but how much do you escalate this in terms of operational impacts and pressure on the government?
The last 3 days, over 55,000 of our members have responded to a survey that we've put out. Over 84% of the 55,000 that responded said they're willing to take action on this.
What does that mean? What kind of action?
Workplace action, again, take it to the streets, and you are going to see a concerted, unified effort of all of the unions in the coming weeks and months ahead to make sure that we get this government to walk back this mandate.
What would workplace action be? Like slowing, like working to rule, doing less work, wildcat strikes? I mean, it can mean a lot of things, Chris Aylward.
Absolutely, it could mean a lot of things, for sure. We're right now at the negotiating table with the Canada Border Service Agency, and we are in the middle of taking strike votes right now for those members at CBSA. And sure, our frontline officers at CBSA, this would not apply to them, but we have a lot of members in the FB bargaining unit that can work from home, right here, even in Ottawa. So again, it's an issue for them, and that's why we said this morning, this government better be prepared for a summer of discontent unless they walk this mandate back.
Chris Aylward, always appreciate the time. Thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
Rachel, what do you make of this? They're promising a summer of discontent, the unions, over the mandate to be back to work 3 days a week versus 2 days a week. What are your thoughts on this one?
Remember a world when we all went to work 5 days a week? I mean, we're living in a new world. I get it, but having to go in 3 days a week, having 2 that you can work remotely, and also when we look at the plan that was negotiated in the last strike last year, which was one of the biggest strikes that we've ever seen, labor strikes we've seen in this country, when the Federal Public Service went on strike, they negotiated a pretty flexible work arrangement. And so it's interesting now. It feels like Trudeau is kind of in between a rock and a hard place when having to on one hand, get the Federal Public Service back to work, but on the other hand, keep them happy as we inch closer to a federal election. And I know that Jagmeet Singh today was coming out and saying, we're going to use the confidence and supply motion as best as we can to fight for workers. And so for me, it's interesting how Jagmeet will make out after all of this and whether or not he can spin this as another win for the NDP when it comes to working with the Liberal government through that supply and confidence motion.
Cheryl, the government says, look, we've got this side letter with the unions that says the hybrid work component is 40 to 60% of the week, and 3 days a week is in that 60%. I mean, where do you think this one goes?
Well, I think 3 days in the office sounds incredibly, incredibly reasonable. And like Rachel said, it used to be the norm that we all went to work 5 days a week. So 3 sounds totally reasonable right now. That being said, a deal's a deal. And unions believe that they negotiated an agreement with the government that the government would not bring in blanket changes that, no matter your situation, no matter where you're working, you are now in the office 3 days a week. And that's because, as people set up their offices through the pandemic, they look a little bit different than they did pre-pandemic, and people don't have necessarily the proper meeting spaces or the proper offices, or in some cases they're actually driving to a location to meet with someone in a virtual meeting that is placed somewhere else. And so, I think it's fair to say, we all agreed that we were going to look at this on a case-by-case basis, given all of our individual circumstances. And I think that's what they're upset about, not necessarily the 3 days a week.
Marty, what do you make of this one?
Yeah, I don't know. Bit of a different opinion. I think Trudeau's doing this because, look, I think he has the political capital to do it. 3/4 of Canadians have gone back to their pre-pandemic work habits. Everybody's gone back to a certain extent. Everybody's gone back to the office, or a lot of people. 3 out of 4 people have gone back to the office or taken on what they were doing before. There's not going to be a whole lot of public sympathy for public sector workers going, well, we want 2 days. We don't want to have to go in for 3 days. It's not something that's going to resonate much with the public. The other thing too is that I'm old enough to remember in 2015 when Trudeau came in, and there was literally people cheering within the public sector because bad old Stephen Harper was gone. Public service is a captive audience to the Liberals to a certain extent. I understand that Mr. Singh is going to try to carve some of that off. That's generally not. I don't think that's going to work. All is to say is I don't think Trudeau has much to lose in this situation.